When I first walked in this morning, I was greeted with, "Where's the handouts?" And I hope you look forward to those, and I'm glad you look forward to those, but I didn't do any today. In fact, I didn't even do a PowerPoint, so we're going old school today. But we are fortunate in that we have this prayer list in our bulletins, and on the back, it is just begging for notes. So please feel free to take notes as you see fit. So today, I just kind of wanted to go through a couple chapters in Matthew. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 24 and 25. And there's a lot in this, but it's kind of a long, lengthy discourse by Jesus. In fact, it goes back to 23, but I decided 2 chapters is enough. And I think it follows, one big thought. I think it was a singular event, just ongoing, and Jesus covers a lot of things. And so we're going to kind of look at that in a little more detail. Now, chapter 24 is talking about the end times, what to look for. And, the disciples asked Jesus, what's going to happen? What should we look for? And Jesus responds. And I'm not going to get into eschatology too much. I don't consider myself an expert in that, but we'll address it somewhat. And I'm not going to read the entire chapter for you. I assume you're familiar with it and you'll be able to look at it. But I'm just going to summarize it. So the first thing Jesus addresses in verses 1 and 2 is that the temple in Jerusalem will be destroyed. That happened in 70 AD during the Jewish wars with the Roman Empire. I think that was an important event. One, because when the temple existed, we fixate on the temple as the house of worship and the house of God. But today we sit in a church, and there's a lot of temples sitting out here. We are the new temple for Christ. He speaks that there will be great suffering. Tribulation is called. Hence the term tribulation, which you hear about often. He speaks that there will be false Christs, rumors and wars and rumors of wars, persecution of the believers. There'll be false prophets. And one thing I kind of keyed on this time when I was going through it is the next thing. Love grows cold. Kind of speaking of apostasy here, where believers fall away. But we see that in society now. We see that some difficulty comes in our life, and we see people, how could God allow this? Why did God allow this to happen? How could a loving God, a good God, allow this to happen to me? And they fall away. Has anyone known anybody that? I think we've all kind of witnessed that. And you hear it in the news. People talk about it all the time. How could a loving God, why should I believe in a God that allows this? I think there's some bad theology associated with that, where we think that God is in control of everything and that everything comes for a purpose and a reason. And in fact, oftentimes we hear people in the church, when you've gone through a terrible event, like you lost a child or whatever, and we say, but God has a plan for this. And, you're going to be able to talk to somebody later. That may be, but that's a lot of nonsense too. Suffering and hurt is not God's plan for us. That is part of living in the fallen world. In the church, we like to talk about, the passage in Psalms. We talk about the valley of death and the mountaintop. A lot of people in the church like to talk about, as Christians, we live on the mountaintop. I don't believe that. I believe here in this fallen world, we're slugging it out in the valley. But as we slug it out in the valley and as we grow closer to God, we can see that mountaintop. We know it's there. We know that we will get there. And that's what keeps us going through the valley. So we can be God's light in this dark world. I've come to the realization that, God is God of love. But he doesn't care about our circumstances. He doesn't care about the terrible things that happen to us. He only cares how we live for him as we go through life in a fallen world. Keep your eyes on God. Keep serving him. He will sustain you, and he will get you through the hard times. So there's that aspect of love grows cold. I know also from personal experience, as my marriage was breaking up, and going through all that hurt and hardship, that was a very, very, very difficult time for me. And I got to the point where I just said, okay, God, I'm yours. That's it. And it was, through the worst time in my life, it was the best time in my life. And I just dove into Scripture, dove into prayer. God was revealing things to me, just awesome. Not only that, but I saw God use me. I saw a lot of great things accomplished, even through little old me. I was really experiencing the power of God. And it was awesome. But as I was praying through and seeing God work things and working through things and just how my prayers worked, and it was awesome, there's one thing he didn't do. He didn't restore my family. Even though I knew that God didn't owe me that, it hurt. It hurts. And so, well, that was a hard time for me, and to a certain extent my heart grew cold. I never gave up on God, but I haven't been living for God with the same fervor. And I'm still trying to recover from that. We need to be careful of the difficult times in our lives. They can be a time of great growth and encouragement. But if we allow it, it can be a time of destruction. Okay, so to continue on. He says that the gospel will continue to be proclaimed and that there will be great tribulation. He warns us that, it's not a time to go get a coat or anything like that. Just run to the hills. I'm not going to elaborate on that any further. I'm not sure how that should play out so much. All we know is that there will be a time of difficulty. But then, he speaks that he will return. He will come back in the clouds and gather his people. So we see the return of Christ. He goes on to share a parable. Not really a parable, but he points out the fig tree, how you can tell that summer is near. So too, we can see signs and wonders and know that the end is near. He goes on then to talk about the days of Noah. Before the flood, the people went about their lives just like any other day, going about their business, doing what they did, completely oblivious to the destruction that would come. It says that the end times will be the same. They'll be unaware. People will be unaware and going about their business. Then he talks about two servants. He says that it is blessed to be faithful. Well, the two servants, the master goes away, and one servant is diligent to maintain the house. He served his master well. He did what he was entrusted to do, and he did it regardless of when the master returned. The other servant basically kept looking for the master to return, but did what he wanted to do and neglected his responsibilities. I found it interesting that he was called a hypocrite. And it goes on to say that hypocrites are condemned. I think it's that second servant is kind of why eschatology is so popular these days. Everyone wants to know what the signs and wonders are. Maybe you've heard of these people that say, well, I believe in God, but I don't want to give my life to him. On my deathbed, I'll make it right then and I'm good to go, right? To a certain extent, I think that's why we're so hung up on eschatology. We want to know what signs to look for so that when we see them, we can get right with God. That's the wrong application of why God gave us these signs. Why are we so arrogant to think that God is a fool? There are many signs that are evident today, and you hear people in the news all the time. You hear people in the churches. There's Christian authors write books about it all the time. There are many signs that are evident. But the Bible also tells us there's nothing new under the sun. In other words, people were seeing signs hundreds of years ago as well. What we look for is what we see. If we're looking for signs of the end times, you'll find them. But that's not what we're supposed to be doing. I believe we began living in the last days when Jesus ascended. And we should be living. I believe the apostles thought Christ was coming back in their lifetime. We should be living the same way. We should live expectantly. It's good to be aware of these things, but we cannot get caught up in them. We shouldn't be looking for and discussing signs and wonders. We should be serving Christ. The signs and wonders should serve to spur us on in God's service. Now, after Jesus tells us all about the signs and wonders of the end times, he goes into a few parables. And I think it's on purpose that these parables follow that chapter. First, we have the parable of the 10 virgins. You had 5 wise and 5 foolish. Basically, the wise, they were going to a wedding feast. They were camped outside the door waiting for the bridegroom to come. But it was later than expected. They knew he was going to come. They expected him to come. They fell asleep. 5 of them were prepared. They brought oil for the lamps. 5 of them were not. So the 5 that weren't went to get oil because they didn't think ahead. And then the bridegroom came. And the 5 that had left, when they came back, they could not get in. They missed out. I don't think there's anything more to learn from this, that we are to be prepared at all times. We know that the bridegroom, Christ, will come. Are we prepared? Are we in readiness? The 5 foolish ones knew they should be there. They just weren't ready for it. We then come to the parable of the talents. Again, we have a master that's leaving on a journey. He has 3 servants. He gives one 5 talents, he gives one 2, he gives one 1. Then he goes away. And then he comes back. Two servants did well. They compounded the gifts that they had. But the third just returned what he was giving. He was called wicked. We learn from the passage that he knew the master had an expectation, yet he did not follow through. As a consequence, he lost what he was given, and he was cast out into darkness. We, the church, need to be expectant of the Master's return at any moment. And we need to be mindful of the ROI, return on investment. We know that the Master expects a return from us. When Christ comes back, he's going to expect to see some fruit. He's given each of us gifts and abilities. We learn from this that we are obligated to exercise those gifts and abilities. And if we do so faithfully, we will be blessed with more and more. But if we fail to act, we'll be cast out. We need to encourage one another in gifts. Whether that is in the exercise of those gifts, or whether that is in helping identify gifts. I know we often see things in others that we don't see in ourselves. I know I've started doing some things because other people pointed out that I could do that sort of thing. It never occurred to me before. As Christians, as a church, as a body of believers, we are to encourage one another and spur one another on to greater things. Someone might have a gift and ability and not realize it. That's where we can help by pointing it out. Others who are exercising their gifts and abilities, we can encourage them to continue to do so. We need to be ready and utilize our gifts and abilities. This will help us proclaim Christ to the world, to exhort one another, and to love. We were talking this morning about the high priestly prayer of Christ. And we were talking about when Christ prayed, he prayed, let them be one as we are one. Integral to the oneness of Christ is love. We should be loving one another. If we love one another, we are united. And we're Christ-like in that regard. The exercise of gifts is not about others. We tend to be comparative. Don't look at what others are doing. Only be concerned about what your abilities are. It's not a competition. I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes when you give gifts or prizes to kids, they'll tear open theirs and get that, but then they're more interested in what other people got. You ever notice that? I have. Fortunately, when we're adults, we grow out of that, of course. I mean, sometimes, you think, you see so-and-so got a promotion at work or another job. It's like, I do more than he does. I know more than he does. It's the same sort of concept. We need to be faithful to what we are able to do and where to do it. And that needs to extend to the church. We have to guard against jealousy when other people practice their gifts and abilities. And if we have a gift and ability that somebody else is exercising, we need to be careful while that we act. Sometimes, you feel called to do something, but somebody else is already doing that in the church. So you don't feel free to exercise that gift. You don't want to hurt their feelings or whatever, That's not the way the church is to be. If you have a calling to exercise a gift or ability, do it. And if that happens to be a shared gift with somebody else, that other person needs to be careful that it's not. Don't get jealous. But another aspect of that I think we overlook is that person might be just thinking, boy, I sure wish somebody would help. Don't let the little walls that we build up keep us from fulfilling God's purpose in our life, especially within the church. We're to be different from society. There's no reason to create drama where drama doesn't need to be. Be content with the gifts that you have. Don't sit there wishing for something else. Use what you got. And try things. Sometimes you don't know what a gift or ability is until you actually try to do it. Then lastly, we come to the parable of the sheep and the goats. Judgment. We hear that the shepherd comes and he has the sheep and the goats. And the sheep did what... let's go ahead and read that one. I don't think I put all that in there. Let me grab my Bible. Sorry. Okay. But when the starting in verse 31. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when? When did we see you hungry and feed you, thirsty, give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even to the least of them, you did it to me. And he will also say to those on his left, Depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. And they themselves will also answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you? And he will answer them, saying, Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. The sheep, the righteous, were just going about their lives. The goats, or the unrighteous, were also just going about their lives. quote Keith Green, the difference between the sheep and the goats is what they did and didn't do. It is not creeds that are stated, but rather lived out to make the difference. The only difference between the sheep and the goats is how they lived their life for God, how they exercised their gifts and abilities, how they were expectant to serve their master. Psalm 40, verses 6 through 8 says, "Sacrifice and meal offering you have not desired. My ears you have opened. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, Behold, I come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart." If we are truly seeking God and His purpose, His acts will work through us as part of our life, how we live our life. So to summarize, I think these chapters and these parables provide a consistent and cogent theme regarding the expectations of the church. We are living in the last days. We are to be about the Master's business. We are to be prepared and to be expectant, living each and every moment in anticipation of Christ's return. In these last days, the days of Noah, we are called to be faithful. If we are truly faithful, we will live out these parables. I Googled what is faith. I don't normally do that, but I did that this time. And I came across a definition that I kind of like. So let me read that to you. Belief has attained the level of faith when it motivates life and shapes the mode of living. The acceptance of a teaching as true is not faith. That is mere belief. Neither is certainty nor conviction faith. The state of mind attains to faith levels only when it actually dominates the mode of living. True faith changes the way we conduct our lives. Are we living for Christ? So now we come to the time of invitation. So as we come forward and sing our closing hymn, if you have business with God or with the church, I invite you to come forward and make that known.